I come from a place where we have a lot of natural beauty, a really inspirational place to be, and Santa Cruz has been quirky and creative, not just back to the 60s, back to the 1860s. It's been a place where people came to be inspired, practice different kinds of disciplines in art. And today it's a real center for instrument making. A lot of it's our fault, but I think it's the right place at the right time. I'd like to ask if there's anybody here that makes guitars or aspires to make guitars. Great. I highly recommend it. You know, it served me really well over my lifetime. If you go online now, there's a lot of information that's accessible that you can truly access the materials, the tools, the know-how to make a real credible instrument. Luckily for me, that wasn't the case when I started out. There was nothing in print on guitar making, and that led me to look at violin making because that was the stuff that was published. And the violin trade is a place where they were trying to make this little instrument that would not only cut through the orchestra and get to the back of the concert hall, but deliver a really sophisticated, rich, full sound. That was a good stroke of luck because in approaching steel string guitars, it gave us a niche in the marketplace that we enjoy today. This is a good place to talk about the fundamental difference in that, and it's really easy to understand. The violin tradition is one of assembling an instrument of frequencies, like notes on a piano, creating a chord, and between those complementary frequencies, we get sustain and overtones. The instrument sounds rich, full, and lasts a long time. That's very cool. When you guys play guitars in here and you find the one, that's the one. That's the quality really that impresses you, the sustain and the complexity of overtones. Problem with the violin tradition of making the components to exact frequencies and then putting them together to be complementary is horribly inefficient. It's not the way to do something quickly at all. That's why the difference in violins up around $2.5 million from the old days compared to probably under $200 for a student violin that you could go out and buy today. The guitar tradition, on the other hand, and cheap violins are made efficiently by making exact sized components. And the secret to mass producing anything is in making your components exactly the right size so you can have assembly stations where they'll only fit one way, and being able to put these in one place and move on to the next goes fast. You don't waste wood, and training people to do it's pretty dreamy. It's quick, it's fast, and remember, when the guitar is done, it's going to be loud and it's going to be impressive. But the problem with that efficiency is wood is so different in the living tree that if you take 10 pieces exactly the same size, they will resonate at random frequencies. So an instrument made out of precisely sized pieces is like throwing rocks at a piano. The results are rarely harmony. It would be really amazing coincidence if your rocks made a chord when it hit the piano. So most guitars in a mass-produced paradigm are a whole range of, let's say, in-tuneness. You can find guitars that completely cancel each other's energy. The different random frequencies will cancel each other out, and the guitar sounds dead and flat. If you throw enough rocks at a piano, you'll get a chord every once in a while, law of averages, and that allows sustain. And if you make enough instruments, you'll get the ones that make a chord. So you'll find this whole degree of quality of sound within those guitars. So we choose to do it the old-fashioned way, the violin way. It makes us a lot less efficient, but we can control that. We can build an instrument in tune with itself that is guarantees sustain and overtones, the good stuff. Let me break down the elements of sound that you can begin thinking about in the guitar that you'd like. And the easiest and probably one of the most important would be, let's call it the EQ, the graphic equalizer on the sound system, where you'd move the sliders to get more or less bass. Let's say if you're playing bluegrass, it's really desirable to have as much bass as possible. People love that big booming bass response. If you were playing a fingerstyle, that's not so desirable. A big bass is going to get in your way. You probably want to choose which note you want the loudest as you play, and so an EQ that's more even would be more desirable and more versatile. That's a simple thing to remember when you try different guitars, or you play your own guitar. You may find that it's just right. Most likely you're going to find you wish it was a little different. A little more of this, a little less of that in the EQ. And it's a pretty easy thing to do. This can be done almost mechanically in the guitar making. The next part of sound I'm going to call tone. And tone gets used really ubiquitously in music magazines and so forth. But in our acoustic physics dialogue here, tone is the quality of bright or dark in the sound. And if you play the guitar very close to the bridge, you get a real bright, ding, strident tone. If you move up over the sound hole, it's a warmer, rounder tone. And that's your personal choice. Again, if you played a singer-songwriter, a folk, a blues, a country, people generally like a warm tone, warm blended tone. If you played a jazz, where again you want to be really articulate, hear all the notes very clearly, a brighter tone is desirable. And we'll dispel a little myth here. Wood contributes to tone. Wood doesn't contribute to the how much bass or treble. So your choices of wood determine your tone. And as you play guitars in here, you'll find you'll find that out. Guitars that are rosewood are generally warmer in tone. The guitars that are mahogany are a little clearer and brighter, and the guitars that are, let's say, cocobolo or a Brazilian rosewood are bright and clear. In the woods, the Sitka spruce is a little warmer, blended tone. Moving through the woods to Adirondack and European woods, brighter and clearer. So you don't need to know that if you're choosing a guitar that sounds right within the store. But thinking about your own preferences, that's where you could go with it. And really what I'm doing here is not trying to help you design a guitar for you as much as demystify where these sounds come from. So we covered tone and we covered the EQ. Now back to the stuff that everybody wants, overtones and sustain, that comes from the instrument being in tune with itself. And I have a couple of props here that I'm going to show you. And by the way, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get this discussion out of the way of how guitars work for you. And then I'll tell you some fun anecdotes and stories about Santa Cruz. This is a before. We've chosen a wood for this guitar. That's Sitka spruce, but we also chose one that was very stiff and dense to brighten up the tone. The configuration of the braces on this are for strength, but they're also to direct high and low frequencies and be able to get the EQ. So you've heard a lot of stuff, probably everybody heard terms like scallop braces, maybe forward shifted X. These are all ways of adding or subtracting mass from this in order to work the EQ, the bass or the treble. But right now we're going to talk about the sustain and the overtones. I'm a little compromised here with this busted mitt, but let's see if I can pull this off. This is, these braces have been placed on this guitar, but they haven't been shaped yet for the EQ. They also haven't been tuned. So these frequencies are random. They're just like throwing rocks at a piano. And therefore, they shouldn't agree with each other very well. don't buy that one. So that's kind of dead sounding. It doesn't sustain. It's not very interesting. And let's listen to these different braces. There's nothing happening here, so don't strain too hard. There's one. There's one brace that's a little bit clearer here, and the reason is pure chance. That vibrational length or note is more complementary to these others than they are themselves to any others, so it rings a little clearer. This is where we're throwing rocks at a piano. And in our factory situation, we'd pre-shape these braces on a machine, put them together, and there would be more or less in tune by chance. Maybe there's 2 or 3 braces that will ring true. We're starting to get a better sounding guitar by chance. So here's after. We've tuned these braces, and let's see what we get here. That's a little more interesting. It sustains, and there's something happening here that's making it interesting. And what that is all these complementary overtones. We have a cloud of notes around the fundamental that make it interesting. And if we listen to these individual braces, they all ring clear and cleanly because the vibrational lengths of each of these is complementing the other. We get sustain and overtones. It's actually pretty simple, but again, it's not a very efficient way to build. So in this top now, we have a lot of the intelligence of the instrument of what we want to achieve. We've had the tone, the bright or dark from the choice of wood, the EQ, how much bass and treble by how these are shaped, and then the sustain and overtones by actually tuning them to each other. That's a couple of the secrets of Stradivarius. A big one with the violins, as I've said 3 times now, is tuning it unto itself so it responds in harmony and creates those desirable qualities. The other secret, one of the other secrets of the violin builders, is they used old wood. They didn't start with new wood. We've heard the story about how older guitars or older violins sound better than new ones. And there's a lot of folklore about that. There's a lot of crazy ideas why that happens. One of the big ones is wood gets better sounding with age. And what it is the sticky resins flow throughout the cellular structure of the living tree to deliver nutrients. And when the life is arrested, they settle down into each cell. So it's like an apartment building knee-deep in honey. And as resonance or vibration moves through that, it's impeded, it's slowed down by that sticky stuff. You can put the piece of wood in an oven and bake it and with moving air, and you can evaporate the moisture and dry it, but it doesn't harden the resins. The resins don't harden by evaporation. They harden by polymerization or chemical change that takes time. So the older the wood is, the more years from living tree, the harder the resins become and the more resonant the guitar is. So 5, 10, 50, 75, or in the case of violins, a couple of 100 years, it's getting good. And the violin makers knew that from the start, so they used timbers that had been aged in that process that had already been gone on. So let's move back to, and remember, I'm not making fun of factories. They do an awesome job, but I have to do this to give you a comparison. And what's done here is there's companies that make $1 million a year. Most of our notable American companies are in the hundreds per day in guitars they build, and that supply line needs, you can't be very far from the living tree to stock that kind of inventory. They're stable. The wood is dried properly and it's stable, but it's got sticky stuff in it. And when the instrument is played initially, and even for the first many years, it's going to be restricted by this sticky stuff that's within the wood. And again, as I explained, as it begins to harden, it sounds better. So there's one of the huge reasons that older guitars sound better than new ones, and what better way to game that than to start with old wood and get a more resonant instrument to begin with. A third part of that idea of older instruments or the violin tradition of building is if you put this instrument together of different components, especially things like the bent sides, you create some tension when you make that assembly. And over the years, that tension will relax and the instrument becomes more resonant. So just by being strung up and played and hanging around for a long time, the guitar gets better as the tensions go away. So I keep calling these secrets, and for the violin tradition they were secrets, is to make the instrument building as little tension as possible into the instrument so it was more resonant from the very beginning. This is a good point to talk a little bit about our philosophy as builders. We are open source as a company. We don't have trade secrets. The reason for that is you can go look it up. You know, if you really wanted to, you could find out how to approach instrument making the way I'm describing here. It's really helpful to have 40 years of practice doing it to get really good at it and really in control of it. But we're not holding something that puts us above competition by knowing this stuff. Anybody can know it. But putting it into practice is another thing. We've given tours for every notable guitar making name almost in the world, and the bigger companies usually leave a little disappointed. They're hoping they can find something scalable. There's a formula of dimensions or a process that's done that could be scaled up from 2 to 4 to 5 to 10 to 100 to 500 a day or 1 million a year. And when they realize that's not how it's going to work, it's disappointing when they walk away. The way this is done is not something yet that you could mechanize. It really requires artistry and judgment to pull this off. And that time translates to a much better guitar and some more expense. And it's also not something you can take into mass production. But remember, guitars are loud. You know, we can do really good with mass production and sell a lot of instruments that way. So that, you know, what it means is Santa Cruz, the quality of sound of Santa Cruz isn't necessary. And for a lot of people, they've never even heard this kind of sophistication in a steel string guitar. But that's what we do. I'm going to ask a question. What do you do?
Real estate.
Great. Well, thanks for your service. That's something I don't know how to do, and I really appreciate there's somebody out there doing it well. And you know, I picked you at random. You could have said you're a teacher, a doctor. You know, you repair holes in the street, but they all have something in common. They're all service to others. And looking at my job that way gives me a whole lot bigger purpose than being a manufacturer or being in the business of making and selling guitars. It also gives a perspective on everything we do, that the side benefit is making a better sounding guitar and giving better quality to our customers. I'm talking about these small companies that supply woods. The reason we're dealing with small companies are family operations, and they're very close to what they do. Our Indian rosewood comes from a yogi family that doesn't even know how many generations they've been in this. It goes back to the dawn of time, that they scouted out wood in the forest, not to cut trees, but to find down trees that they then turn into musical instruments. And they found through generations of experience that the old wood sounds better. And that's actually true all over the world. We look at you know, archaeological artifacts in the northwest U.S. where people, the Native Americans, sank their cedar logs sometimes for a couple hundred years and then brought them up and turned them into percussive instruments and things like that because they sounded better. So we have this all over the world where smaller operations are using wood for the sound of musical instruments, and they're very protective of the resources. They're green way before it was a trendy, popular thing to do, but it fits into our values just fine. When we choose to do business with people that have like values, again, the side benefit is we make better guitars. And since our time's a little limited, I'm going to jump really far ahead and say we go from the family in the jungle to the family in Tennessee that sells our guitars, and we choose all along that food chain people that we'd want as roommates, people that we would want to live with. And that's one of the biggest keys to our success in what we do, is not compromising those values or keeping secrets. One of the best ways to see this is come visit, and I invite you to do that. We're 40 years old this year. We started in 1976, and that is an incredible run. It's the best way to understand what we're doing. We're a small team. I started out really on my own as a single builder, and I found out really quickly I couldn't learn fast enough. The limits of me experimenting with guitars and figuring out how they work. I could be 30, before I got good at this. And so the idea of working with a team was not only attractive, it's not completely altruistic, really selfish ideas there. I could get better quicker and be a lot more fun. And that's what started Santa Cruz Guitar Company. The idea of working as a team to do more than we could individually. And we're very much true to that today.
What is it like celebrating 40 years of guitar making? And what would you consider as your greatest achievement?
40 years is a really long time. And we had a journalist that asked me in an interview here really recently. She took a tour through the shop, and at the end of it, the journalist said, 40 years, that must seem like it just flew by. And I thought, and I went, it seems like about 40 years. And the reason for that is it's so many different seasons, different challenges, different people on the team. It's not a miracle that we're here after 40 years. It's a million miracles, a lot of bullets that we've dodged. Anybody here that has run your business or worked in management of other businesses, it's a lot of it's just good luck and providence. I would like to go through how we actually began and started. But I think one of my biggest accomplishments is just that, is working at my bench, building guitars, doing repairs, and having that revelation is, wow, if I work with other people, this could be a whole lot more fun. Like I said, that was the beginning of Santa Cruz Guitar Company. I really got my idea in that was, I wasn't even, how do I start? Where do I find other people that I can do this with? That was really a just simple answer to a prayer. Within probably 3 weeks of having that realization, I had 2 different people approach me that were involved in the music business that wanted to do it, wanted to join in and make guitars. And the idea was not to be the next Martin or the next factory. It was to do, the best we possibly could and not compromise our values doing in it.
How exactly did you start with that?
To impress a girl.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Go back to that era. Guitar was so integral in coming of age. Learning to play guitar and impressing, a future sweetheart with that. That was really my motivation. And by the way, it worked. 44 years last February.
What was your stage name?
I performed under the name Otis B. Rodeo, which I still think is brilliant. You know, it combined a lot of my loves at the time. I grew up pretty rural, and everything about Old West and cowboy stuff is still dear to my heart. The playing guitar, that was my idea for the way to express my creativity, to pay forward, give back to the world, and what better way than to be the next Bob Dylan, you know, with that. In that season, where I was playing guitar, writing songs, and doing that, I was waiting for my girlfriend to come home from school. I was sitting on the curb in front of her house, and I was playing the guitar. I was thinking about it, and the thought was, you know what? It was an old harmony, and I was going, I got to have a Martin, because then I will be the next Bob Dylan if I could get a Martin guitar. And so the idea of fixing it up for her, and it came to me, somebody makes these things. Wow, how does that happen? And I decided, well, I'm going to make a guitar. And here's some gratitude I want to express to everybody. My dear departed mother and father had a huge influence on me. My father was, his official job was window trimmer. And there's a lot of people here that remember this back before the internet. People put their goods in a boxed-in window of the store that fronted the street, and they changed it seasonally for, you know, little elves or bunnies or whatever. And that was my dad's job. He's really a commercial artist, and he worked in metal, plastic, wood, all these mediums, and he did it at home. And so being around that environment, we made our toys, we fixed things. The idea of taking my guitar apart and figuring out how it worked was, you know, that came really naturally to me. I went, okay, I'll do that. My mom was the search engine pre-computer of the day. She was a reference librarian. If you're writing a book or researching a paper, you went to my mom to get the information. You know, she would find the books from surrounding towns and libraries. They'd come in and off you go. So my dad wasn't really demonstrative. I don't know what he thought about me taking my guitar apart. You know, you know, because there was kind of this constant vibe of disapproval. Anyway, I knew he disapproved of that. My mother, on the other hand, thought it'd be a really good idea to let's research, you know, how to put that back together. So again, there was nothing on guitars, steel string guitars at that time, but there was plenty on violin making, including the diaries, the notes, and so forth from some, and then speculation on the makers. And that was hugely fortunate that I started my career thinking about how to control the sound. First, I had the fundamentals of the violin building, and there's some foundational stuff to work with there. If it's stiff, it's a higher frequency. It's flexible, it's a lower frequency. So you can begin that right there manipulating the thickness of a top, or the shape of braces, or the choice of wood to start working with the EQ. The choices of wood and their densities. One of my joys is, you know, I travel around the world for wood and promotion and things like that, and I'm always hanging out with string instrument makers, and some very strange stuff too to learn about that. And it is a lot of commonality, and this really comes down to science. And I don't mean this dismissive, but I learned really quickly what the guitars that were iconic to me, whether it was a Martin or a Gibson, what you see in there is not where the information is. One of the reasons that science has such a difficult time divining the secrets of the Stradivarius is they're looking for consistency in measurements or a chemical analysis. And the irony I just showed you, the secret to consistency is changing the dimensions depending on the density of wood. So to make two things exactly the same sound, they have to be different measurements. we go back to Stradivarius. Stradivarius, so I read this, he was asked, to what note do you tune your violin? And he said, to the note nobody will play. That's heavy. Sounds really zinny. But what he meant was, you don't want to tune it to a note. You want to tune it to a non-note so that it responds uniformly in anything you play. And what that is doesn't mean, so you have your fundamental note, let's say an A in that case. You don't want an A sharp or an A flat because that would be hot in that key. So you want it, if you divide the A to B in 100, which they call it cents, 50 cents is a sharp or a flat, you want to do it 25% or 25 cents off that, or a quarter note. That's the ideal, and that's what Stradivarius did. So when we switched from C to A440, we went a quarter, 25 cents off, and that's why the F5 mandolin sounds so astounding today. If we went back to maybe 1870s, guitars were tiny compared to today. I'm looking at this one hanging down below. That would have been a big guitar in 1870. Maybe Martin's, it would have been the, the really little guitars. But that was the accumulation of millennia of refinement of the luthier's art. There was nothing lacking in those. Sonically, they were super sophisticated, everything you could ever want, but people decided they wanted louder. And you get up to the teens and the 20s. Remember, music used to be something somebody came over to your house and did. That's how you heard music. And then when we started having people play on stage, for a bunch, music used to be something you played in the biggest room in the house. And even if it was a church, a little guitar like that was plenty of volume. So move into vaudeville, where you're competing with barking dogs and banjos, you need something louder. So guitars got bigger. OM, orchestra model, it was a big guitar when it came out, and it was loud. And then shortly after that, we got to the dreadnought, which is really, really big. So when I started building guitars, nobody would play anything but a dreadnought. That had become the standard, and that's what everybody wanted. Because of its air volume, it was loud, but also because of its air volume, it was predominant in the bass. So it was getting further from the sophisticated idea of an even response for a classical repertoire. Let me not get too far out here. Now we're going the other direction. As we play in more controlled circumstances, we can amplify the guitar. We got excellent microphones. Guitars don't have to be big anymore, and you see a really strong trend since maybe 1985 for guitars getting smaller, 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 but not inferior sounding at all, just quieter. So that's why we have the different sizes. Also, it's marketing. When we started building, we had to make a dreadnought, or we would never have paid the rent. That's what people recognize. So today, if we look at guitars, most of them are a variation on a Martin or a Gibson, an OM or a dreadnought. But thank God, over the last 40 and 50 years, we've had a lot of innovation, and we're accepting, different sizes. But that's it. That's really where that comes from. When we started building, we had a great advantage in building guitars because it came from the violin tradition. So we could make a really nice sounding guitar. But a player could sit down, play our guitar, and go, "Oh my God, this is the best sounding thing I've ever heard." But they were not about to buy it, because what would their friends say if they didn't buy a Martin? You spent that kind of money on something we never heard of. So people didn't have the confidence to buy our guitars. But when we could say something like, people knew we made a guitar for Tony Rice or Eric Clapton, all of a sudden, not only was it okay, it was very hip and in. It was inside, and there was a real buzz to do that. So Tony, I made mandolins with Darrell Anger, who's still a dear friend. And Darrell Anger is a really well accomplished violinist. And at that time, he quit making mandolins with me to go try out for a band that turned out to be the David Grisman Quintet, which is really a breakthrough in string instrument music. It was bringing kind of a jazz repertoire, modern repertoire, into traditional bluegrass instruments like guitar or whatever. And Tony Rice joined that band. So Daryl brought Tony over to meet me, and I just stopped building on my own and started Santa Cruz Guitar Company for the reasons I explained earlier. And Tony had this filthy old Martin from 1934 that had been modified, highly modified, drug around, and he needed something that had more substance to do these jazz phrasings. He's doing the quintet, more substance, mid-range and treble. I'm not smiling, I'm smirking because a lot of you understand. I'm talking about an iconic Martin Dreadnought that belonged to Clarence White before it belonged to Tony, and I don't even know what that would cost today. It's like totally, it's an icon. It'd be priceless. But at the time, it wasn't fitting what he wanted to do. It was a nice old tubby bluegrass guitar, but it didn't have what he needed. So we didn't start out to copy that. We started out to build an instrument that would work for him. And we thought we knew better than him. You know, the first one was a failure. But Tony was a perfect example of an artist that came to us to get something specifically that he couldn't find off the shelf. And it took a couple of tries before we dialed it in. But it's been a really a beautiful friendship. We're both 25 at that time, and we're both not 25 anymore. we're in like 2 weeks of each other. And as Tony progressed through his career, played different music and so forth, so has that model evolved to meet modern needs. So it's almost a microcosm of what we do, the whole evolution through Tony. So man, was that a nice break. Isn't it funny for all of us that have got any expertise through practice? It's hard to remember when you were dumb. You think you always had these talents and skills, and you go to teach somebody else, and you're really impatient that they can't get it right away. What was very cool is the foundations that we had, again, from my building on my own, and the violin tradition, is we could put together, we didn't have any surprises when we were done, but boy, were our designs homely, things were very awkward. So a combination of function, like the playability, and the design sense did refine a lot. And also, it was a coming of age, really. I don't know if any of the rest of you, but when I was like in my late teens, early 20s, I was the center of the universe. And I knew what was the right guitar for everybody that ever was going to play guitar. And that's what we set out to do as Santa Cruz Guitar Company, make that one guitar. And that was the breakthrough and the realization is like, in fact, when we made Tony's guitar, we got in Bluegrass Unlimited with a story. People were calling up regularly asking for that guitar. And I was saying, that's not really what we make. We're custom builders. What would you like? And people are like, thanks anyway. And finally realized, there's, this is why I realized, we're a service business. We're not forcing our ideas on somebody else. So that was the breakthrough with that, where we started to explore different woods, different voicings, different EQ to be able to do those things. But what's neat is those, for our 40th anniversary, we have our first guitar, our fourth guitar, and our sixth guitar that are going to be on display. And I'm just delighted to say they're all very credible. They look awful, but they're good sounding instruments. And I'm sorry if that sounds braggy. I think that's more of a testament to the tradition we come from, standing on the shoulders of giants, than to what we discovered. I have a multi-layered relationship with wood. If some of you might have seen the video that's on the front of our the opening page of our website, it's kind of a reverential tour through the redwoods up near where we live, and I look at these trees, and I don't see these trees as guitar making material at all. I see it as something completely different. And so working with old woods with a story is a big part of what we do. We get the advantage of old wood sounding better, but it makes it whole. It makes it a full circle story when we build an instrument for someone that they know the materials are responsibly acquired. They're part of the good guys when it comes to the food chain of wood, not part of deforestation. The guitar sounds better because of that, and there's a cool story that goes along with it. So we just for our 40th anniversary made a guitar with oak that came from the Czech Republic. This is a good example of getting more than you give. Roman Zajzacek, the brand is Rosewood guitars in the Czech Republic. And I had developed a friendship with him and sharing information. And I sent him a local redwood top, it's like, and that it's like gold, it's very, very cool once you get away from where we are. And he sent me a back and side set of oak, and the oak tree was unearthed as a sand mine that was being exhausted. It had operated for longer than anybody knows. And at the bottom of the sand mine, these oak trees started to show up. And it was weird, like, where do you get, it still spins my head around. For them to be preserved, it had to happen quickly. It wasn't over many years that they got buried in sand. It was like, dink. They had to be in an anaerobic environment where oxygen wasn't going to decay them, and an absence of moisture. And it was weird enough that they carbon dated them. And the carbon dating came up 8,000 years old. And I thought about it, 8,000 years old. Am I the guy? Should I be, or should this just wait for somebody that's smarter than me? I went on Wikipedia and I went 6,000 BC. Let's see what was going on back then. And I found out that it'd be another 2,300 years before the first written word. That's how old that is. It was preserved. It wasn't fossilized or petrified or decayed, and it was like wood, and it was this spooky silvery color. We call it the ghost oak, but because of that inspiration, and it turned out to sound awesome. And I'm going to add one thing here. I was really decision impaired what to do with this. And two things came together. One is our 40th anniversary, and a friend, Brent Cole, who specializes in reclaiming Sitka spruce in Alaska, was rebuilding his factory or his sawmill on a place that used to be permafrost, and they unearthed this spruce tree that the wood was blue. And again, that was weird enough, they had it carbon dated, and that goes back to 1000 BC, so 3,000-year-old spruce. And when those things came together, I went, yeah, maybe I'm the guy, to do this. And so we built an instrument for our 40th anniversary, really as a statement. It brought together all of the cool stuff, the practice of reclamation rather than cutting trees, the history of the woods and luthery, and a way to put this in a nice dramatic story. All of our jobs are just our vehicle for getting through life. It's your values, what you really want to return is the important stuff. And here's a guitar that would start the conversation for just about anything I wanted to get across.